Hey, what's going on, you guys, and welcome to Gator Inspection, the show where I game and you watch me explain. Today's game up for inspection is Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, a visual novel / adventure game where you take the role of Phoenix Wright, a rookie defense attorney who just so happens to quite frequently take on some real wacky cases. The first game in the series was released exclusively in Japan for the Game Boy Advanced, and eventually made its way to everywhere outside of Japan with a DS version, with a WiiWare version coming out a little bit later. It also got re-released on most modern consoles a few years back through an HD remaster of the first 3 games in the series. That HD trilogy is the way I experienced this game for the first time, with the footage you're watching right now being the WiiWare version of the game. If the first time you played the game was through the WiiWare version, I am very sorry, and I hope that you give the games another chance someday. The WiiWare version of the game is in a similar screen ratio to the DS and only re-released in Japan Game Boy version, but for whatever reason, they decided to give the game this huge border that goes across the sides and top of the screen, so the game is super small in the middle of your screen, instead of just being, in a normal screen ratio. I can't begin to imagine why they ported it like this, even though the weird borders are in 4:3, so it just makes the actual gameplay portion of the screen even more small than it would have otherwise been if it was just in a weird screen ratio like the DS or Game Boy version. I'm pretty sure the reason they did it this way was so that the bottom screen information from the DS version of the game could sometimes pop up on the screen, but the only time that happens is the short time frame in between trials, investigations, and cases, where you either save your game or choose which case you want to play. They already had to program a way for the game to shrink and show the bottom screen stuff sometimes, but they couldn't have just made a new save screen? And it's not like they didn't make any changes to the game itself with the new way of presenting evidence by shaking your Wiimote. I'm just glad that they also have the present evidence option mapped to a button as well, because having to shake the Wiimote every time you present evidence would be slightly annoying. But only slightly. I feel like they should have just taken another step to adjust some stuff so it could fit into a 16:9 ratio, and not have the bottom screen need to appear for at most a minute or 2 during an entire playthrough. But I can't be too upset about the WiiWare version due to the fact that they eventually remade the first 3 games for newer consoles like I mentioned before, with these HD versions being a lot more than just HD versions of the pixel art version from the original versions, with how every character sprite and background was redone in a hand-drawn art style. I'd also like to mention that I don't usually like when games get remade and replace perfectly fine pixel art with really smooth looking artwork, like the few new Final Fantasy games that have been remade in that way. But in Phoenix Wright's case, I think it does a lot to make all the characters' expressions look more distinct, and for lack of better terms, expressive. That's not to say that the pixel art is bad by any means, but I honestly think both art styles are good in their own ways. Since this tangent on the different versions of the game has gone on this long, let's just pretend that I said my usual Gator Inspection stuff already, like the part where I go, will this game do this, will this game do that? Play it for myself, tell you what I discovered, throw in a joke about being an attorney, yada yada yada, and mention what the DS version of the game added that wasn't present in the original release. When the game was brought to the DS for a worldwide release, they decided to make use of the new handheld's power by making a case that utilized the power of the Nintendo DS. But I really wish they hadn't done that because the new case was kinda shaky, to say the least. It also didn't help that you had to pay extra for it when it re-released for the WiiWare version, even though it already came with the previous version of the game. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Why should you, the viewer, care about what I think about the extra case in this game? I mean, I haven't even talked about all the other cases in the game yet. So, let's talk about those cases. The first case of the game is more or less a tutorial for the rest of the game, and you'd expect a tutorial to be the worst part of the game, like any other game with a lengthy tutorial, but in this case, it's still pretty good. and is also the case you're seeing on screen right now, as I don't want to show you the later cases for spoiler reasons. Even though I'll talk quite a bit about those cases, I'll try to be as spoiler free as possible, as I really do think this game is worth playing, even if you don't think it's something you would like. This case is the shortest case by a large margin, and it only consists of one trial. And it's also quite simple without the game treating you like you have no idea what you're doing, even though if it's your first time playing an Ace Attorney game, you'll quite literally have no idea what you're doing. And that is actually portrayed in the game, with the first trial also being Phoenix's first trial, and him also not having any idea what he's doing along with you. So, as all the characters in the game are explaining things to Phoenix, they are also retrospectively explaining those things to you as well. This, in my opinion, is a very good way of introducing new players to how the game is played without blatantly saying how the game works or that you're playing a tutorial. And none of the first case's greatness would be anything without the game's writing and comedy interwoven throughout the game. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is a very funny game, and I don't say that in the way that it's funny because there are a lot of instances of the game trying to do something and it ends up being kind of funny. I mean that this game is just purely funny, and it doesn't rely on any cheap jokes either. Every time the game tries to be funny, it pretty much always succeeds in doing so, and I can't really remember a time where a joke that was told didn't stick the landing. The writing is really good, and in a largely text-based game, good writing goes a long way. That also doesn't mean that the game doesn't have its more serious moments either. Whenever the game wants to be serious, it also succeeds in that as well. The game is just full of really well-written dialogue and characters. And speaking of characters, we've got plenty of both main and side characters that all play a pivotal role in each case they're present during. First and foremost, we've got our main guy, Phoenix Wright, the rookie attorney, that is a great character for the player to take control of. And if there's ever a time where something odd occurs, Phoenix will usually say something or think something adjacent to what you might also be thinking, and he'll also give you very subtle hints of what might be the solution to something that you might not be thinking of without telling you what the answer is. He's also no stranger to coming up with witty comebacks or being visibly shocked at some wacky thing that might occur during a case. For each of Phoenix's witty remarks, there also has to be someone at the other side of the court knocking him down, with that someone being Miles Edgeworth, the snobby prosecutor who makes his debut along with most of the other major characters in the second case. Some of these characters include Detective Dick Gumshoe, the forgetful detective that may or may not be more damaging to a given case than he is helpful. Then there's Mia and Maya Fey, who just so happen to be from a family of spirit mediums that help out Phoenix during the game. You also get introduced to none other than the Judge, an absolute legend that very conveniently is the judge for all the cases Phoenix takes on in this game. All of these characters make quite the first impression during the second case, as the second case is in a lot of ways an extension of the first that ups the ante by a few notches. This case also marks the first time when you have to go and investigate crime scenes for yourself. You spend just as much time investigating things during each case as you do spend time in the courtroom. These sections of the game are very similar to your typical point-and-click adventure game, where you go from area to area finding evidence, speaking to people who are relevant to the case, and using what you discover to find more evidence or dialogue trees. The investigations are relatively okay in the grand scheme of things, but can sometimes be a little much to take in all at once, with all the information that is being told to you over a very short amount of time. I would also quite often find myself getting stuck at particular moments without knowing what to do or where to go next in a typical point-and-click adventure fashion. Those moments would tend to be pretty annoying, but when you finally figure something out, it's somewhat rewarding. The investigations are sometimes good, sometimes bad, but in the end, they always do contribute a lot to the trials. Speaking of trials, after you finish up each individual investigation, it's time to get in the courtroom, protect your defendant, and get that not guilty verdict. The trials are in their simplest form puzzles, where you use your information at the right time to further prove your defendant's innocence. And that's pretty much it for the description of the trials, because each one progresses a little bit differently from one another. And the only thing that stays consistent throughout each of them is occasionally presenting your evidence at given parts of a trial, moments where you were given 2 or 3 choices of something to say, or the main mechanic of the trials, the cross-examinations. The cross-examinations are segments where a witness takes the stand and gives their testimony of any crimes that have transpired. You then get to question them on each line of dialogue they say to see if something doesn't quite add up with the rest of their story or is proven wrong by a piece of evidence you have. At these points, it's time to present your evidence and prove that the witness isn't being as truthful as they should be. Or everyone in the courtroom says, "What does that have to do with the case?" and you're thrown back to square one. For every case after the first, you usually do several investigations and trials until the court is able to finally reach a verdict, whether it be guilty or not guilty. The second case for the most part is quite alright, nothing too crazy, and you kinda get what's going on by the middle of the case. With, like I said before, how it's pretty much just an extension of the first case, with most of the evidence and ways of figuring out who's guilty being relatively the same. I think the reason they tied the first 2 cases together was to get the player more accommodated to each mechanic before throwing them into an entirely new case. All in all, this case was okay. You figure things out very quickly, so there isn't much mystery to it, but much like all the other cases, the characters really added a lot to an otherwise really simple case. The third case gets a little more wild, throws in a lot more complex characters and solutions, and even during the last trial, I still didn't have a clear idea of how things would play out. Even though the ending of the case was sorta anticlimactic for all the built up, with the guilty person not showing up until the final investigation and trial. I kinda wish they took the case in a different direction at the ending and had a more surprising culprit than the character that had barely any screen time. Culprits not having enough screen time is a problem that most of the trials have in some sort of way, although the culprits themselves are also some of the most wacky and entertaining characters in the game. Well, besides case 3 where the culprit was very uninteresting. Still a perfectly fine case though, with some perfectly fine moments. Before talking about the 4th case, I want to talk a little bit about this game's visuals. This game has a very unique look to it. From the characters to the areas, everything looks quite nice. The areas are all very well detailed, so it's easy to figure out what aspects of them are interactable, along with each of them looking different enough from one another to avoid confusing the player. The areas are great, but where I think this game's art style really shines is the character design. Each and every character has very unique and interesting designs, and with that comes a lot of unique and great animations that make talking to each character always an entertaining aspect of the game. Speaking of great characters, the 4th case in particular has some pretty great ones, so let's hop right back into the case discussion. The game starts getting real during the 4th and until it got localized final case in the game, where you start realizing that there was actually a sort of overarching story that wasn't apparent until this case. A lot of the smaller bits of information that you learn over the course of the game start making a lot more sense than when you first learn about them. But the first few trials and pretty much all the investigations did sort of weigh down the whole case a bit, although the trials did eventually get better as the case went along, with the case ending on a very high note. This case serves as a perfect conclusion for the game, but for some reason, when Capcom decided to localize the games, someone in charge of the game decided to add a 5th case that has very little to do with the rest of the game's story. But before we talk about the extra case, let's talk a little bit about the game's soundtrack. I am certain that you have heard at least a few songs from this game, even if you aren't aware of it. To say that the soundtrack for this game is iconic would be an understatement. Each and every song is unique in their own way and fits the tone of each moment they play at quite nice. I mean, the song that plays whenever you hit the witness with some evidence at the end of a trial, great stuff. You always love to hear it. And you know, I think that's about it for what all I have to say about the music, which could only mean it's time to talk about the fifth case. So, the fifth case. Where to start? First and foremost, this case introduced a lot of new mechanics like throwing powder on things to find fingerprints, rotating 3D models to find secrets like it was a Resident Evil game, being able to view a particular video to search for evidence, and many other new ways to uncover evidence. All of these mechanics don't sound like they would be bad, but instead of gradually having these mechanics be used throughout the case, like all the other mechanics of the game, there would usually be parts where some character would say something along the lines of, "Wow, we should dust this for fingerprints," or, "We should probably inspect this object in 3D," and halt the pace of the game to have you do a mini-game sort of thing. It would be a lot less annoying if these mechanics, especially the more simple ones, were something you have to think about using, or maybe have one of the characters slightly mention something that isn't straight up telling you to dust, inspect, check blood stains, etc., etc. But whenever the solution to anything is to do one of those things, the game almost immediately tells you what to do, instead of letting you figure it out like all the other parts of the game. Like, to even be able to play this case, you would need to either pay for it in the WiiWare version, or beat the other 4 cases in the HD and DS versions of the game. And unless you bought the WiiWare version of the game along with the extra case and immediately played the extra case, you would probably be able to figure out what to do when you find a handprint on something. And in this scenario where you are still able to buy the now unavailable WiiWare version, the excessive hand-holding throughout the case would be fine in the instance where you skip the other cases and just play the extra one. But at the same time, why would you buy a DLC for a game you haven't played yet? Well, actually, now that I say that out loud, I kind of do that a lot. Anyways, let's get back to the actual thing this video is about. And speaking of video, the video inspecting mechanic isn't necessarily the worst, but after you watch the same clip over and over again, it gets really tedious. Like, at first it's really cool to see one of the explorable areas in the game and a few of the characters in 3D, with the evidence you uncover via the video being very well hidden, all while not being nonsensical. But after you watch, rewind, and pause the same video a dozen or so times, it gets a bit tiring. A bit tiring is basically my overall thoughts about the case, with the first couple trials of the case being quite bothersome, with all the things you do feel like they have very little to do with the case as a whole, and that kind of becomes true with the trials not really meaning anything until the 4th or 5th one. And I really mean 4th or 5th. This trial is the longest one in the game by far, and really starts to drag, especially in the writing department, up until you start getting to the end of the case. The later trials are really good in all honesty, but it takes a good while to actually get there. But don't let one extra outside of the main plot case of the game scare you off, because to tell you the truth, I'm not even sure if the case is canon to the series as a whole, as I've only ever played the first game, and even then, the case isn't completely awful. It still has its ups to counter the downs. Okay, so we've talked about all the stuff. My very basic, spoiler-free, more gameplay-based thoughts on each case, and covered all the game's mechanics. So, I think I'm gonna give a rundown on all my more specifically spoilery filled thoughts on each case. So if you still want to play this game spoiler-free, now's your chance to go to this description and click on the silly little timestamp for when spoiler time is over. Have all the people who don't want to be further spoiled skipped ahead to the final part of the video? I'll give you one more chance. Okay, it is time to get spoilery, starting with case numero uno. Like I mentioned earlier, this case was pretty much just a tutorial with the basic characters who aren't Mia Fey, the always confused judge, and a certain Larry Butts, who I really hope appears more in the future games because I thought he was really funny. Like, at first I thought he was going to be super annoying, but he's great, and he even shows up in a later case as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go on to the next case. Case 2 kicks off with the death of Mia Fey, which honestly shocked me quite a bit on my first playthrough, as I thought she was going to fill the role of being Phoenix's boss, for a lack of better term. But she does still continue to mentor Phoenix via being channeled through her sister, Maya Fey. Both Mia and Maya are from a family of spirit mediums, so even though Mia dies, she still makes quite a few appearances during the game. And at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that Maya isn't able to have her own personality, as she is very much her own character aside from occasionally channeling Mia. Maya is usually the character that'll give you subtle hints about what a solution for something may be without outright telling you, which sounds like it could get real annoying real fast, but she never overstays her welcome and is a great help to Phoenix? Or is she actually like an employee of the agency Phoenix inherited from Mia? I'm not really sure, but maybe she's like an intern. Maybe they'll clear that up in the next game, I don't know. I also only realized a couple days ago when I started writing this script that the nickname she gives Phoenix, Nick, is based on the Nyx part of Phoenix. It took me an incredible amount of time to realize why Maya calls Phoenix Nick, but at least I got here eventually, right? Anyways, we also get introduced to Gumshoe, who is at the moment my favorite character in the entire series. He's the right amount of silly and serious to be a good comic relief at times, while also not being completely one-dimensional. Then there's Miles Edgeworth, a character that I thought was pretty annoying the first time he showed up, and I was really confused as to why I had seen so many people consider Edgeworth a great character. But as the game went on, he became a lot less stuck up without getting of his more posh and proper attitude. I wouldn't be surprised if the game's writers intentionally made him more annoying at the start of the game to make the player wonder why on earth Phoenix cared about him at all, and if that was their intention, it worked. Now that I got the main characters out of the way, the second case itself is fine, but it feels more like an extension of the first case than it does a new case, with even the murder weapon being the same for both. I won't go into detail of each and every part of the cases, as if I did do that, this video would be way longer. I'll just mention the standouts of each case, with the standouts for this case being the wackier than usual witness and culprit. The bellboy was a great balance of only caring about himself and the hotel he works for, while also very desperately wanting the attention of others. With others being specifically April May, the dramatic secretary of Blue Corp. There's not much to say about April May, as she doesn't make many appearances, with this case being on the shorter side, and the same applies for the bellboy and Red White, the owner of Blue Corp, a sketchy intelligence agency. Red White himself is a real son of a gun who thinks he is way above the law, even physically attacking Phoenix at one point. He's also Mia's killer, and it doesn't take too long to bring him to justice with the bare minimum amount of help from Grossberg. I guess I haven't really talked about Grossberg quite yet, but I'll save it for the fourth case when he is more relevant, so for now on, let's move on to case 3. Case 3 brings in a lot more down-to-earth characters. Well, down-to-earth for Ace Attorney standards. You got characters like the Steel Samurai Will Powers, Penny Nickel, and Cody Hackins, who are all okay, if a bit basic, as they don't really leave a lasting impact. Well, I guess the Steel Samurai does, even though Will Powers is the Steel Samurai, but the joke of Steel Samurai being more interesting than Will Powers is not lost on me. And after looking up all the characters from the case to make sure I didn't miss anyone, I remembered that Salmonella was a character. And yes, his name is actually Salmonella, The puns only get stronger the further into the game you get. Anyways, Sal is just a geeky guy that is fine, I guess. But considering how I literally forgot he was a character, says a lot about him. I mean, his name is Salmonella. You think I would remember that at least. The true standout of the case, however, is Wendy Oldbags, a legendary security guard that definitely doesn't do a horrible job at making sure things are secure or guarded. It does suck though that I've somehow been spoiled to the fact that she eventually makes another appearance at some point in a future game, which honestly leaves me more intrigued than it does upset me. Like, I didn't even get spoiled to some major plot point, just a future Wendy Oldbag appearance. The last, and certainly least interesting character to talk about for this case is Dee Vasquez, the producer for The Steel Samurai and a few other shows, and is the murderer of Jack Hammer, the victim for the case. Dee only shows up during the final investigation and trial, and is such a boring character that I wish they had just made one of the other characters the culprit, as Dee is just so bland. Like, out of all the characters from the first 4 original cases, Dee is 100% my least favorite character. Like, besides being a murderer, she's just so, ugh. Like, Red White was still a fun character even though he was a total douche, but Dee was just a douche, without the fun. But the culprit of the next case makes up for the third case's anticlimactic conclusion in spades. The fourth case has a great cast of characters, starting with Lotta Hart, the very noticeably southern witness to all the stuff that occurs during the case. She goes from telling you she's currently attending a university, to telling you she actually lied about that, and how she's actually a paranormal photographer, all the way back to revealing she actually is a university student. She's a whole roller coaster of a character. But she's not the only roller coaster, because we also get introduced to a new opposing prosecutor in the form of Manfred Van Karma, a real thorn in your side throughout the whole case. He also happens to be the one who taught Edgeworth everything he knew, and uses a lot of similar notions to Edgeworth to get his points across. It also shows how cold Von Karma is, considering that the defendant in this case is Edgeworth himself. So Von Karma would rather protect his not-so-truthful perfect record than protect Edgeworth, even though it's later revealed that Von Karma 100% knew that Edgeworth was not guilty. The true guilty party was the seemingly senile old man Yanni Yugi. Yanni was a very intriguing part of the case, with him pretending to not have any recollection of any of the crimes he committed. And you can't forget the reason he eventually gave up the senile old man act, being his parrot, Polly. Polly brought about such a wild trial where you would ask Polly so many random questions to differing results to just see if anything would stick. And the turning point for 2 different cases being a parrot that was taught to remember certain aspects of a crime Yanni didn't want to forget was an extremely clever and funny aspect of the case that fits so well with all the zany events that transpire within each case. And case 5 is pretty cool in the way that you tackle 2 different cases at the same time, with both having Edgeworth as the defendant. Edgeworth really couldn't catch a break during this case. You first take on the case about the murder of Robert Hammond, then you tackle the DL6 case, a case that during the trials of case 5 was a few days away from being closed forever after remaining open for 15 years. But before I talk about the best aspect of the second case, I guess I finally have to give what little of an opinion I have about Grossberg. Marvin Grossberg is an attorney with ties to many different things in this game, which is honestly kinda weird because for what we know about him from this game, he doesn't really seem competent in anything he does. Not only does he completely give in to Red White's sketchy practices, he seems to always conveniently be on vacation whenever Phoenix seems to require his help. Not sure if he will make a return in future games, because even if I don't like him, I can't say that he isn't an entertaining character. All that's left to talk about for Case 5 is the fact that Manfred von Karma was actually the culprit of the DL6 incident. And what I really like about that twist were the small hints along the way that kinda showed that he might be the culprit, and by the end of the trial, you have all the evidence you could ever need to go from it seeming like Von Karma just wanted to expand on his perfect record to literally putting him behind bars. Von Karma is another strong contender for my favorite character, but I think I like Gumshoe just a bit more. Although Gumshoe doesn't really have a comical finger waggle for everything he disagrees with, so that is a downside. Von Karma is still an excellent antagonist, for an equally excellent final case for the base version of the game. We get not just one, but two really sinister antagonists for this case, with both of them taking a seemingly not guilty role, until they break character after a multitude of compelling evidence that doesn't let them just play it off as a coincidence. And after the final trial of the game, you get a nice picture of all the main characters in Defendant Lobby 2 right after, which is great and you love to see it. Alright, that's all the cases talked about and accounted for. Yup, all 4 of them. I guess it's time to talk about Case 5. Again. Pretty much all of the characters for this case are extremely basic for how long and complex this case is. Angel Star wasn't too interesting, with her just kind of being there for the most part. Even though she technically does play a big role in the case, it just doesn't feel like it. This is probably due to the fact that most of her dialogue is her either talking about boxed lunches or talking so vaguely about something that's very important to the case. Angel's boxed lunch bit will be performed every other second she's on screen, and it doesn't really add to her character at all. But Angel isn't the only character with an odd gimmick, with another character that has some sort of reoccurring bit being Yanni Yogi, with how he'd fall asleep and suddenly wake up for 5 or so seconds after he's asked a question. And unlike Angel's boxed lunches, Yanni falling asleep does add a bit to his senile thing he has going on. But Angel isn't the only character with a weird gimmick. Officer Meekins is a rookie cop that may or may not know what is ever going on at any given time, but he tries his best. Whenever he starts talking, he usually turns on his megaphone, which is accompanied by a short siren sound that got old exactly one time after he did it. And then he took the stand as a witness for a trial, and man, that was rough on the old ears. Besides making me very familiar with a very specific siren sound, Meekins is in a lot of ways just a super amplified version of Gumshoe. Then there's the Sky sisters, Lana Sky, the defendant for the case, and Emma Sky, who likes science. Emma liking science plays into all the fingerprint searching and bloodstain spraying that goes on during the case, so that should give a little bit of insight as what I might think about her. Besides tutorialing at you every once in a while, Emma is largely just a boneless version of Maya. And speaking of being a boneless version of another character, Lana Sky is that, but instead of being another Maya, she's seemingly supposed to be another Mia. And she sometimes acts similar to Mia, but most of the time she acts very aloof to everything you ask her, and when she does give you information, she still does it as aloof as possible. The next character to talk about is Jake Marshall, the very Western individual that on paper should be very entertaining, but ended up leaving a lot to be desired. Much like Angel and Lana, he also doesn't contribute much to the case, even though he is also very important to it. It's just kind of weird. Besides being cowboy inspired, he doesn't really even have that much in terms of personality either. He is just a cowboy. And after testimony of uninteresting characters, we get introduced to Damon Grant, the intimidating police chief who definitely has a couple secrets swept under the rug. And even when you finally lift up that rug, Grant plays it off like it's not big a deal. He reminded me a lot of Red Wright, but given a lot more time to build up his character, and in terms of personality, he has it all. He's menacing, threatening, and any other word that is adjacent to those, while also only letting that side of him show for very brief moments. Besides the returning main characters that usually shine no matter what the situation, like Gumshoe, Grant is the real showstopper for this case, and really helps it bring it back after the lackluster start. Whew. What a collection of thoughts about all the spoilery stuff in the game. So let's wrap this video up with a summary of my thoughts. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is a really great game that even after watching this video, I still recommend you play, as there are plenty of great moments that are really hard to describe without downright spoiling parts of the game. Everything from the music to all the fun visuals of characters freaking out or having an extreme look of disagreement, it's all great. I'll more than likely play more of the games sooner rather than later, and I'll probably even do Gator inspections on them as well, because when this game was good, it was really good. But even during what I thought were some of the more uninteresting parts, it was still a relatively good time through and through. So, if you're in the mood for some fun attorney action, I'd say it's time for your first roundabout. Unless, of course, you have any objections to that.